And now we're going to move forward with other types of traumatic injuries. And some of the traumatic injuries we have are fractures. There are many different types of fractures. And as you read the emergency room notes and the operative records, you're going to see terms like this: avulsion fracture, burst fracture, comminuted fracture, depressed fracture, fatigue fracture, all these different types of things, stress fractures, March fractures. This is where a medical dictionary comes in. And while these things, because of electronic health records, are becoming more standardized, you'll still see some terms happening again and again: comminuted, avulsion, burst, green stick fractures, impacted, infection, lateral mass, and others. Skip over some of these. And again, one that is very, very common that we see is this one, Salter-Harris, right? So it's a fracture that epiphyseal plate at the very beginning of a long bone, the spiral fracture. And again, medical dictionaries are something that every coder, no matter how experienced you are, can benefit with these. One thing that's very obvious that we've seen and you've seen in other classes are whether a fracture is described as open or compound or closed, right? Closed fractures cover many things, including the comminuted, depressed, fissure, green stick, hairline, and others. Basically, these are fractures that the end of the bone doesn't poke through the skin. Open fractures, which may also be described as infected, missile, puncture, compound, or with a foreign body, are open. So not only do you have the fracture, you have the bone going through the skin, which causes a huge, huge problem with infections. These are very nasty injuries. And again, how we would code these would be fracture. And we'll take a look at some of these, starting with the skull fracture right now. Again, fracture is described as being traumatic, non-traumatic, right? And after you get on or about page 156, take a look at what type of fracture, whether it's traumatic, non-traumatic, what have you. And the subterms will guide you. If it's a traumatic fracture, which is more common, you'll see these terms starting on or about page 157. And the bones are listed in alpha order. And the bones are described at a very specific level, as you can see here: acetabolum, acromonium, trapezium, hamate bone. So if you're not familiar with what these things are, this is when you need to consult a medical dictionary. And again, you can see here, maxillary fracture, fracture, maxillary, right? And these are also can be Lefort fractures. Again, common eponym. Let's take a look at Lefort fractures. And again, as we can see here, we know that a Lefort fracture is a fracture of the maxillary bone. In other words, the upper jaw. So you can see this right here. And then down here, it's the description. Is it 1, 2, what have you? Anytime you see this check mark, these check marks, that means that you have to go to the tabular to get the exact code. Moving past the fractures, we can also have traumatic injuries to the muscles. These are strains, sprains, contusions. So starting with contusions, these are basically what we call bruises, where we have an impact injury and burst blood vessels, we get the swelling, what have you. These are usually self-limiting conditions. We can also have a strain, which is a tearing of the muscle fibers, hamstring strain, what have you. And then we can have sprains, which are partially torn or overstretched ligaments, ligaments being things that hold the bones together in the ankle, say elbow, what have you. And then we can have a muscle tear where we're having a separation within the muscle fibers themselves. Myalgia is the medical term for muscle pain, kind of a global description of the pain. And that's all I have for you. We'll be back with more discussion about different things about external cause injuries, including those very important 7th characters. We'll see you then.